Hello, welcome to You Look Like a Badger. My name is Amber and this is my monthly podcast where I talk about queer films. This month is May and the theme for May is Be Gay, Do Crimes, where I discuss queer themed crime films, and this month's pick is Kajillionaire.
We don't have time to be horsing around. That was our best thing.
It's a new camera, I didn't know.
This is really bad. Once your face is in their system, they got you fines, 401k, home equity. But maybe you want all that, I don't know. Me, I prefer to just skim.
So do I.
Do you? Oh, that's interesting. Because most people want to be Kajillionaires. That's the dream. That's how they get you hooked. Hooked on sugar, hooked on caffeine. Ha ha ha, cry, cry, cry.
Kajillionaire is a 2020 crime comedy directed by Miranda July, centering on petty criminals, the Dines, as they attempt to pull off various heists. We follow Old Dolio, a 26-year-old woman, as she navigates her family dynamic with the arrival of Melanie, another woman who immediately attracts the attention and affection from Old Dolio's parents that she was never given growing up. Grounding the film tropes of the heist film in reality, the movie is a fraught and very human coming-of-age story, where a woman frees herself from her parents' stranglehold and learns the necessity of love in adulthood. It's a queer love story that almost wholly centers on self-love and self-realization. This film was nominated for a GLAAD Media Award in 2021. It has a 90% critic score and a 47% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, which I think is the lowest audience score that I've encountered when doing this podcast, which is interesting and we will discuss later on. It has a Letterboxd rating of 3.7. So still mostly positively received, more so by critics than by audiences, clearly. But yeah, generally positively thought about. Let us go through the top reviews on Letterboxd. This first one is from Carsten, and they write, I think literally every scene topped the previous one. I cannot emphasize how part of this felt like it was made specifically for me. Oh, that's very cute and also incredibly relatable. I had a similar experience watching this film for the first time. This next one is by David Elric. Maybe I'm projecting, but Miranda July's Kajillionaire feels like a movie by someone who looked at their newborn child and wondered, how do I not fuck this up? How do I love them just the right amount? How long can hair get? A massage is refundable. Small pancakes? Stuff like that. From what I was reading from reviews, what people came away from this film realizing was how kind and empathetic it was, and at the same time manages to create a protagonist who is clearly in distress at her life and wants to diverge from the people who raised her, which we will get into in a second. So I'm going to put my spoiler warning here. If you haven't seen the film, this will spoil it quite a bit. So if that bothers you, either go back and watch it and then come back to this podcast, or stop listening, I guess.
Don't go, hon.
Hun, you've never called me that.
I have. I have called you that.
Oh? Call me hun then. You can't do it. I bet you could if it was a job though, right? $1,575 to call me hun.
Well, three-way split.
It's $5.25 each.
I don't want to do it that way this time. It's one word, just say it.
We don't call you hun, or sweetheart, or baby. We don't wrap up little birthday presents with ribbons.
I don't want...
Yes, that's what you want. And what else? Me to put you on my abdomen? Make pancakes? Me to do a little dance?
No.
Yes, you want us to be false, fakey people.
I'm going to start with the representation of family in this film. I think that's important to set up before I start talking about the representation of queerness, because the film asserts that queerness and family are kind of blended together and they have to be deliberately pried apart for that to not be the case. What we get from the film is that in the beginning of the film, Old Dolio is a amalgamation of her mother and father. So we see that physically. They all kind of dress in very baggy, what look like secondhand clothes. They speak in a similar kind of cadence, and Oldolio has the exact same haircut as her mother. Similarly, Oldolio kind of expresses opinions that don't seem to fit with what her life experience would be, because we see that she is kind of naive, which is not to say that she's not smart, because she is. She comes up with like schemes. She comes up with like the main scheme of the film, but she is sheltered in a way that she hasn't had a normal life, and therefore just kind of parrots what you can tell her parents have fed to her. So an example of this is one of the first crime plans that they do in the beginning is they try to return this couple's watch that they stole so that they can get a reward. And when Oldolio returns to her parents, she says something like, that rich couple, they were just obsessed with their daughter. They just talked about her all the time. They knew all about her life. Isn't that so weird? And, you know, as an audience, we're like, no, it's quite normal for parents to know things about their children. But we are told early on that the relationship Oldolio has with her parents is purely a business one, is not affectionate or loving. They seem to have had her simply so that she could assist with their various crime plans. A huge symbol of their relationship is the fact that they don't live in a house. Now, this could obviously be a pretty obvious representation of their class, like they can't afford to live in a house. We see that they don't have money, so they rent an office building instead. But in terms of symbolism, the fact that they live in an office building that has soap coming through the ceiling is a representation of the fact that their relationship is strictly professional. You know, they sleep in a workplace, one that is falling apart, which again, very, very symbolic. I mean, kind of obvious when you say it out loud. They live in a crumbling workplace. It is a professionalism that's unsustainable. And the kind of consciousness raising moment that Oldolio has is when she's made to attend a parenting class so that they can get some money. Oldolio goes to a parenting class in place of another woman who is meant to be going there on probation. Her parents take the money and Oldolio attends the class. And every time that she attends, she learns various skills. All of these kind of pertain to the ways that children need their parents. And in the beginning, Oldolio is quite skeptical and almost standoffish at what's being described to her. What Oldolio says is it's a very funny moment when she's asked by the instructor about a fake child, and the instructor's giving her all these tips. Oldolio responds with, "You don't want to baby it like that. You know, a baby. You don't want to baby." You don't want to baby a baby. This place kind of serves as the first place where any kind of need for affection is realized in Oldolio. I think we come to the realization that she's been repressing a lot and maybe not even realized that she has been lacking in affection. So when she learns that it's important that the baby goes on the mother's abdomen in order to build up the immune system, and she realizes that she was put on a cot instead, it's this kind of moment where she realizes her family has never been a safe place, or a place where even if her parents do love her in some kind of way, she's never felt loved. I think all of this can kind of be exemplified in the fact that she's called Oldolio. How when you hear that name for the first time, you're like, that's not her actual name. That's not something her parents actually named her, but it is. She kind of has an old-timey criminal name, or like what would be a code name in a heist. She wasn't even given a proper name. And we learn that she was apparently named after a homeless man who won the lottery. I think we can kind of see that from the parents' point of view as them imbuing their child with the kind of energy they want to receive back. So even if it doesn't make sense for her to have a man's name, that's barely a name. It's not a name, actually. They want the energy that man had. So they bring that into the family and they name their child Oldolio, even though it's not a name for a child. And there are moments where we can definitely see that Oldolio is the one doing the parenting. She's actually like I said before, she's actually behind a lot of the schemes, and she seems more switched on and capable of being in the world than her parents do. And she has all these skills, you know, she learned to forge before she learned to write, which is really sad but also incredibly impressive. And we see the parents' irresponsibility shown in the fact that the second they get a significant amount of money, instead of paying the rent on the office building that they've been inhabiting, that they've been trying to get money to pay for, they spend the money on a hot tub. Like, pretty much immediately. We just see that she has to be the responsible one because her parents won't. And it's really kind of sadly funny because they assert that they felt it was insincere to treat her like a child. But at the same time, they didn't behave like adults. They don't do responsible things, and they've never been the type of parents that are actually treating their child like an adult. They're just dumping on her and expecting her to be the parent. Like, I didn't want this film to be as relatable as it was, but I think to link all this back to queerness, it's a very kind of queer situation as it is, where this family isn't really a family, they're kind of like a business, and this child was never a child and had to be an adult the whole time and only learns to be babied as an adult. I think in terms of queerness in relation to the family, your parents have a set idea of what they expect you to be. They choose your name and they imbue you with their own points of view, and you, for a very long time, have to live by their rules. If you live in their house, then that's just it, you know? We can link this pretty much directly back to growing up being gay or being trans and having a realization in adulthood when you're away from your parents for maybe the first time, and just kind of realizing, oh yeah, that was pretty fucked up, that I was never given the opportunity to be my own person. Like that, it was never an option for me to be this sexuality or this gender. It was always expected that I would do what they expected of me. And along with that, there's a lot of kind of mental work that the queer person has to do if then they have to go back and educate their own parents about queerness, because they obviously never interacted with it and never bothered to give you the information to interact with it. So if you do have to expose your identity to your parents, then you are having to do all the labor. They wanted you to be straight and you weren't, and that might not have disappointed them, but it was unexpected, and then you have to go back and explain your identity to them, and that takes a lot of work. You have to be the adult in places where your parents weren't.
The refrigerator broke.
So, you must be the refrigerator repair person.
Okay.
I bet you meet a lot of lonely women when you're out in the field repairing refrigerators. Housewives must be throwing themselves at you, huh? You know, if you need tools, we have tools.
I'm just here to do a job.
In an interview with Vogue, Miranda July had this to say about the representation of queerness in the film. Everything you need to know about the queerness in the movie is shown, but I also wanted to leave as much room in the story as straight movies get to have. I often say, if Aldolio had been a guy, the second she entered the movie, you would know she was going to hook up with Gina Rodriguez's character. It seems like a surprise to some viewers, but I'm following a fairly warm path as far as romances go. I think what I liked about the romance in this film is that Miranda July is right. It's fairly familiar to have a kind of rivalry between two potential partners. If it was two straight people, then that wouldn't be an abnormal thing. Kind of an opposites attract kind of situation where Melanie is confident and loud and fun. Aldolio is quite serious and withdrawn, and you know, she kind of speaks in this really odd way, which is kind of hard to describe, but hopefully you'll be able to get an idea from the clips. I think what's unique though about having it be two women is that you get this dynamic of queer envy So Oldolio, instead of initially seeing Melanie as a potential partner, it's kind of set up that Melanie would be Oldolio's replacement because she seems to get on so well with her parents in a way that Oldolio just doesn't seem to. And this kind of jealousy slash resentment is quite common in stories with two women. There's been countless of them. I'm not even sure I could name all of them, but it's kind of that dynamic where you really admire this other woman because she's very beautiful and very talented and very good with people, but at the same time she's better than you. It's kind of that odd situation where it's quite a common situation actually, where you are like, do I like her or do I want to be her, or is it both? There's a very cute and funny moment where Oldolio is not incredibly self-aware, so she definitely doesn't realize how gay this comes across, but she tells Melanie that she needs to wear more clothes, you're making everyone uncomfortable. Like, that's just so revealing, no pun intended, because like I said, Oldolio dresses in these very baggy clothes, and Melanie, she wears like, what's it called, like a vest top and shorts. So what Oldolio is saying there, you're not dressed like us, therefore you're not one of us, but at the same time she's saying, stop being so hot, you're making me feel attracted to you and that makes me feel weird. It's this very weird dynamic where, because Oldolio doesn't get affection from her parents and they immediately seem to show affection to Melanie, it's not just the envy of, I'm so attracted to this woman that it's driving me mad. It's, what does she have that I don't? Why can't my parents like me in the way they like her? Still, it's not all envy and cruelty. There are a few really kind of tender moments, completely opposite to what Oldolio experiences with her parents, where there's the scene where Melanie's nail comes off and Oldolio just very gently goes to reattach it, and it's very cute. And also, subconsciously, I think Oldolio is performing an act of kindness that she doesn't expect reciprocation on, which I think is just very telling, because Oldolio has always kind of existed to serve and follow orders of her parents. She's not expecting anything from it. I'm not even sure, it's hard to tell whether Oldolio even realizes that she's doing something romantically coded. Melanie's honestly quite surprised by it as well. It's just a nice act of unnecessary kindness that kind of indicates that Oldolio is capable of affection. It's not that she's not, it's that she's never been given the opportunity to have it reciprocated. And the fact that Melanie goes out of her way to take care of her is very sweet. Similar to Oldolio's consciousness raising at the positive parenting seminars, Melanie has this realization of who the Dines are, particularly as parents, but just as people, where, you know, they included her in their schemes and they were kind to her where they weren't to Oldolio. And what this culminates in is them proposing a threesome with her, which is just outrageous. Just awful behavior from these terrible people. Just concrete evidence of how they just use people around them for their own gain. They never really saw Melanie as their daughter surrogate in the way that Oldolio thought she was. We're just, you know, objectifying this woman in a way that she expressed discomfort with earlier in the film, saying, you know, she was being flirted with on the plane and she said she found it annoying, and then they went out of the way to do this, proving that they don't actually care about people outside of them, which is nice. Cool. Melanie and Oldolio have this kind of joining moment where they both realize how terrible these two people are. And I mean, it's quite sad, but also fortunate because they both realize this and it brings them closer together. I'm going to read another quote from Miranda July from an interview she did in Rolling Stone. "If you think this is obvious, which unfortunately it's not because it's still a love story that has not been seen a million times. If you treat it like that, it's obvious from the get-go. It's in Oldolio's repulsion, and yet everything she does and says sort of betrays how she's feeling. I wanted to give her that. I love the idea of this seemingly conventional woman being a knight in shining armor for Oldolio. just her getting to be loved.
My cousin Timothy, when he was trying to kick pills, he would be fine, and then he would have this sudden wave of needing them really bad.
Well, I think this is a little different because they're my parents.
In what sense?
What?
In what sense are they your parents? What's an example?
We split everything 3 ways. We have since I was little.
What do you spend yours on?
What,
Your third.
we go in on everything equally. Actually, that's another example. That makes 2 things.
You might not know this, but I actually wrote about this film last year when I saw it for the first time. I wrote a review for it because I found it incredibly interesting and poignant. And I was really impressed that someone had written a coming-of-age story with an adult protagonist, which a lot of coming-of-age films are centered on teenagers who, when going through puberty, have a lot of very sudden moments of maturing. But there are very few films about adults who maybe started at a place of naive normalcy and moved to a place of freedom and self-realization, at least I can think of. Even if those do exist, I'm sure they do. I don't imagine that many of them are queer, which is a shame. Aldolio, at the beginning of the film, is someone who struggles with people, and in particular she struggles with human touch, and she moves to a place where she is able to receive affection from someone who genuinely cares about her well-being. There is a literal earthquake in the film that shifts the world around her, and all of this is kind of topped off by the fact that her parents, as a way of kind of saying goodbye to her and to her childhood, and in a sense to the fact that they manipulated and used her, they give her a present for every birthday that they never got her a present, which was from ages 1 to 18, which is just heinous, but we won't get into it now. Jesus Christ, it's incredibly sad. This act from them, the giving of the birthday presents, works in 2 ways. So it is a goodbye from them, but it is also a kind of a solidification of their true and unchanging nature, where they give her these presents as a way of apologizing for the lack of affection, but all of the presents are, in fact, a scam, and the presents are given, and the parents use this as an opportunity to rob Melanie's house. So they leave her with these presents, which she can take back to the shop and get the money back, and that's their final goodbye. It solidifies their terrible, awful nature, but at the same time, it's an affirmation for Aldolio that her parents were never very good for her, and they are unwilling to change or be different. And I think as a queer person, this kind of confirmation that your parents love you, but they won't be able to change. It's sad, but at least you know where you stand. It's always kind of scary to be queer and then not know how your parents will react. If we see this as kind of an analogy for coming out, her parents have asserted that this is as far as they can love her. They are unwilling to move. They feel stuck in their ways and they're not going to change. And having that information rather than having the unknown hovering above your head can be comforting, very saddening, but comforting to at least know where you stand. I am in fact going to quote from my own review because I think I articulated it quite well last year. I wouldn't want to repeat myself anyway. Here's a quote from me. It's a strong coming-of-age story that suggests, for many people, growth of character doesn't really happen until your 20s, even if most of the films in this genre are set during people's teenage years. This relates so well to the film's portrayal of queerness, how most queer people don't get to have a traditional childhood/teenage romance that straight people do, and that this lack of intimacy during this time, especially when it isn't being supplemented by familial or platonic relationships, can be deeply traumatizing. The coming-of-age story becomes one where the protagonist must lose a lot, like her family, in order to develop into her own person. This is a story of loss and what we must learn from that loss. It's about moving out of a space that's pouring soap through the cracks in the ceiling so that you can grow. Let me ask the question, does the film look like a badger? Is it actually evil and terrible? So I haven't watched many Miranda July films. I think this is actually my second one. This is the one I've watched first. I have watched 2 Miranda July films, and this one is my favourite out of the ones that I've seen. In my opinion, I just think the story is very strong. I get a good sense of the characters. I like that it's a queer coming of age story about someone in their 20s. I like that that's a story that exists. I like that it's about bad parents and how they don't mean to be bad, but they just are, and that's kind of how it goes. I like that it has a happy ending. That's so nice. I like it a lot. But, and a big but, Miranda July films are not for everyone. Clearly, the audience score on this one isn't very good. And according to reviews, it's too weird for some people. People just did not gel with it. And you know, it's safe to say that Miranda July's style is fairly niche. It has a very indie, quirky, kind of hipster film feel to it, which isn't going to be for everyone. And that's okay, I think. I will say that this one's probably more coherent than some of the other films that it gets compared to. But still, if it's that kind of style that you're against, then I won't blame you. It's just, you know, a preference. The only other thing that I could possibly think that might rub people the wrong way would be Gina Rodriguez. I know she's quite controversial for some people. I'm not going to go into why, because I don't really have an interest in doing that. If it's Gina Rodriguez that's putting you off from this, then I wouldn't really blame you. Recommendations. I have 2, and they're quite different. So the first film is called Bound, directed by the Wachowski sisters, and the reason I'm recommending it is because it is also about gay crime, which, you know, if that's what you liked about this film, then you will also like Bound. I will say that the tones of Bound and Kajillionaire are very different. Bound is an erotic thriller where someone is getting fingered within the first 15 minutes. So, just warning about that. I think what their connections are that they both they link queerness with criminality and then explore the marginalization of both of those identities. It's very interesting, and if you haven't watched anything outside of The Matrix by the Wachowskis, and I'd really recommend Bound. I think it's one that people would recommend. I think it's the most liked out of the Wachowskis' films outside of The Matrix. Second recommendation is a British film called Benjamin, written and directed by Simon Amstell, and it's a British romance film about a emotionally repressed gay man who is a filmmaker trying to finish his film and gets kind of sidetracked when he falls in love with a musician. It's very cute. It's a very kind film, I'd say. Very similar in that sense to Kajillionaire. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. My next episode should be in June. Now, June is Pride Month. The theme of that month is going to be Pride, and I'm going to discuss the queer documentary, to kind of explore actual gay history. If you'd like to stay updated, please make sure to follow me on Twitter at LikeABadgerPod and on Spotify, and subscribe to me on YouTube. If you would like to read more of my work, you can find my writing at ambercanwalk.com. And if you enjoy what I do, you can donate to my Ko-fi, which is in the show notes. Everything that I've quoted will also be in the show notes if you want to read some more. Thank you again for listening, and I hope to see you in June. Bye!